When I was a little baby, I got a very special Christmas gift. One of those AT Games Genesis consoles, you know the ones, with the bad image quality and the bad sound and the bad controllers, and they were awful. But I didn't care at the time. I was just happy to have one, mostly for 2 games, Sonic 1 and Sonic 2. Also, Comic Zone was pretty cool. And it was the first time I've ever experienced a Sonic game, and it was really fun. I never got past the second level, but I still really enjoyed what I played of it. It wouldn't be until 2019 when I decided to pick up Sonic Mania, when I finally really got into Sonic. In the course of a couple months, I played Sonic Mania, its DLC, Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, and like 3 minutes of Sonic Generation before I realized my computer couldn't run it. I believe around the same time I had also played the Sonic CD mobile ports, but I can't pinpoint that. But I was and still am a big Sonic fan. Recently, as of February of this year, I played through all of Knuckles Chaotix on my friend Kipperskip's stream. I think that's the most fun I've had playing a game in a long time. Everything's hectic and wild and hard to follow. It's a Sonic game that gets a lot of hate, and sometimes for good reason. But if you have a friend who's willing to play it with you, give it a shot for me. But where did this all come from? Well, to answer that question, let's go back in time a bit. Before Sonic, before Sega made games, and before the first commercially sold video game. September 17th, 1965. In a field in Osaka, Japan, a young Yuji Naka crawled his way out of the soil and made his way into a random home. There, he was taken care of by a so-called family. At around 15 to 16 years old, he would start listening to a Japanese electropop band of the name Yellow Magic Orchestra. They heavily use instruments such as synthesizers and drum machines, them being early adopters of the technology. The use of such techniques would spark something in a young Yuji Naka, specifically a love for computers. He would have that lingering in the back of his mind and go about his life. In this period, he would experience the still new art form of video games. This would further intensify his passion for computers and direct them solely towards the medium. When college came around, instead of going, he decided to buy a computer and tried to live out his dream. Keep in mind, with the culture surrounding work in Japan, this was incredibly risky. And it would almost immediately backfire when he applied to work at Namco and was denied because of his lack of college education. Really quick, I want you to take a second to actually think about the ramifications of that. Without Yuji Naka at Sega, and without Sonic, let's be real, the gaming landscape would be completely different. After applying to basically everywhere, he landed a job at Sega, and he thrived there. Sega was still slim pickings, trying to make its name in the small business of game consoles, so he was given plenty of creative control, which he wanted a lot of. But before that, he was in some dingy basement checking floppy disks. His first real game would be a 2-man programming project, Girl's Garden, made for the SG-1000, and made by Naka and Hiroshi Kawaguchi as a training process for making full real games for the company. But apparently it was so good that they just went and published it. Let's see what the hype's about. When he started working full-time, he would work on one game every 1 to 2 months, and yet still worked almost every day on overtime. Some things never change, I guess. During the early Genesis era, Naka had suggested that Sega went into the direction of one-upping Nintendo, specifically doing stuff that was impossible on Nintendo's hardware at the time. This is but a taste of what Sega would become in the 90s. In that same era, he would see Capcom's Ghouls and Ghosts at Amusement Machine Show. What caught his eye was characters moving diagonally on slopes. He would beg on his hands and knees for Sega to allow him to port the game to the Sega Genesis consoles, so he could recreate such awesome diagonal slopes. And they obliged. And in the process of making it, he was able to make a 360 loop that the character could run around. Now, where have I seen that before? With the planted seeds of rivalry, Sega finally wanted to take some action and become a true competitor against Nintendo. And by taking a page out of their rulebook, no less, they needed a mascot. And that mascot needed a game. Naka would be the perfect person for this, as he had an unfinished prototype of a game titled A Game to Beat Super Mario, and that mixed with a group effort to make a mascot. One would become Rice Star, one would be Dr. Eggman. This one is my favorite because just look at how cool he is. But when all the designs were finalized and they decided that Sonic dating a human woman was weird, they made what we know today as Sonic the Hedgehog. As we all know, it blew up, easily being Sega's flagship title, the only game that could give Nintendo a run for their money. We did it, we did the pun, let's go. But after the release of Sonic, Yuji Naka was tired of the meager pay given to newer Sega employees at the time, so he up and quit. He was immediately rehired by another branch of Sega. He moved to the US, where he worked on Sonic 2 as a chief programmer. The Americans working alongside him kinda hated him. Naka was not that kind to the American staff, and once development was done with Sonic 2, he expressed his frustrations, and as the lead programmer on Sonic 3 and Sonic 3 and Knuckles, he wanted and got a fully Japanese team. And after all of that, he was done with America. He moved back to Japan, where he was fully promoted to a producing role, and helped found Sonic Team. And of course, Sonic Team's first game had to be none other than Nights into Dreams for the Sega Saturn. The stated reason why Naka and company did not want to make a Sonic game for the Saturn just yet was because he couldn't do a full 3D Sonic game, so he didn't want to bother. This is commonly cited as the reason why the Sega Saturn bombed commercially. I mean, he technically was able to do something, that something being Sonic R. Well, I guess he would finally get his wish with Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, where they would split up their development teams into a Japanese branch and an American branch. If you didn't know, that's why San Francisco is in the beginning of Sonic Magic 2, because that's where the American team is staying at. Around that same time, Naka would work on the Dreamcast online functionalities, with Choo Choo Rocket and Phantasy Star Online, a game still being played to this day by some people. And Naka would be promoted to CEO of Sonic Team. Only a couple years later, he would leave Sega altogether to start his own company, following the decline of the Dreamcast and Sega pulling out of the console market. And the last game he would work on Sega was Sonic 06, which he left halfway through development. Oh, that makes sense. His new company, Probe, mainly making WiiWare titles. Notable work includes Wii Play Motion, and thus Naka would start another, as a subsidiary of Square Enix, Balan Company. Their first project, Balan Wonderworld, had some serious promise to it, with the return of Sonic's art director Naoto Oshima. It was also co-developed by Arzest, a company known for Hey Pikmin. Oh no. Yeah, Balan Wonderworld was not popular, like, at all, facing harsh criticism on all fronts. He would later sue Square Enix for removing him from the director's seat 6 months before release. It's sad that I have to leave on such a downer note, but that was the story of Yuji Naka. November 17th, 2022, Yuji Naka was arrested on charges of financial crimes, specifically insider trading. Before any public announcement of the mobile game Dragon Quest Tactics, Yuji Naka and 2 other Square Enix employees bought hundreds of thousands of shares for the company. And he did it again! He bought 144.7 million yen worth of shares of Square Enix A-Team before the announcement of the new Final Fantasy game. He can't keep getting away with it!